Welcome to another Down the Rabbit Hole video. It's time to talk Star Trek. I've talked a lot of Star Wars on my channel, and I love Star Wars deeply, as you all know. I actually went to Norway to see Hoth. I spent a lot of money on it. I'm a big Star Wars fan, for sure. But Star Trek has had an interesting little history for me, and I just thought, you know what, I've talked to death about Star Wars, and there's something that has inspired me to maybe, mix it up a bit, show some new content on my channel. Not only that, with the development of the COPPA rules now, and how a lot of Star Wars has a lot of toy stuff, and that's kind of aimed at kids, it's made me rethink, do I want to do any more Star Wars toy review type things? And I thought, well, I do have that other science fiction show that I quite like, and you really couldn't argue that Star Trek is in any way kid-friendly, or at least associated with kid content, so I feel like I'm safe to talk about Star Trek. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a bunch of new videos about Star Trek and the original series, the Next Gen, a whole bunch of different things. Primarily, for this video, I want to kind of go into my rocky history with the Star Trek show over the years. It's been a real roller coaster, and I thought, all right, now's the time to talk about it. So, when I was very, very young, a friend of mine was hugely into Star Trek, and it was on TV, what do you call it, when they went into syndication and they had reruns all the time. Sunday afternoon, we had to stop playing because he had to go home and watch Star Trek. And I watched a few. I was always like, well, what's this show about that he likes so much? And it scared the dickens out of me. My goodness. Some of those episodes, like The Devil in the Dark, the sort of evil pizza creature that digs through the ground with the heartbeat, that was scary stuff. And I remember around the time, I didn't really watch it too much. The Lights of Zetar also scared the heck out of me, where these little things would take over this woman, and it was like freaky Twilight Zone, scary nightmare material. I was just like, nope, I don't know what the appeal is for you with that show. We would play with the little action figures. Well, not so little. But I used to think, man, I don't know why you like this show so much. Then Star Wars came along, and I kind of grasped, space and adventure and excitement, guns and battles and stuff. Okay, now I get it. But I was swept away like everybody else into what Star Wars was all about. And this is where my first real negative with Star Trek appeared. My friend, who was quite opinionated, had nothing very good to say about Star Wars. And he would very much poo-poo it and talk about how Star Trek is so much better, it's so much more literary and intelligent, and it has much better acting. And I was just like, well, the heck with you, man. And it built up a resistance in me, not one that really makes any sense, but you're thinking little kids around the play park, right? Kind of like the old Genesis Nintendo argument. Sorry. Yeah, the Genesis versus Sega versus Nintendo argument. This was like the early version of the console wars for me. This was the sci-fi wars with me and my friend, because he would always say, Star Trek is so much better than Star Wars. And it sort of built up a, well then, the heck with Star Trek mentality in me. I just thought, no, I don't like Star Trek, based on the fact that my friend said it's better than Star Wars. And, admittedly, around the 70s, early 80s, you could watch those old episodes and see it's a very hard sell. The go-go boots and the purple lights and the bongo drums. Star Trek was very much of its time, which was great in the 1960s, but come the 1970s or 80s, when science fiction is swelling in popularity again, no, I would look at it and go, the effects look dumb, the costumes look like they're made of plastic, this is ridiculous, the music is terrible, nothing about Star Trek redeemed itself. Then Star Trek the Motion Picture came out, and I'm going to talk about that in its own episode. I was really surprised how much I liked Star Trek the Motion Picture. Now, it's got its problems, and a lot of people have torn it apart, and especially back then, when people were all ready for some more exciting space adventure that Star Wars had kind of laid the groundwork for, and Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers. Well, Buck Rogers wasn't yet, but there were a lot of gunfighting in space and combat type shows that we were used to. And Star Trek the Motion Picture came out, and it was very slow, very boring. Look at all the special effects, and nothing else is happening for 20 minutes. But although a lot of reviewers didn't like it, it did very well in the theater, and I think that's because of the huge fan base was just like, anything for Star Trek, we love it. So it did okay. I remember coming out of the theater, I think I saw it twice, and I was just like, wow, that is a different, thought-provoking, very neat science fiction show. But I didn't really put two and two together with it connected to the original series, the 60s show. I mean, my friend was just like, yeah, that's what Dr. McCoy looks like now. That's what Captain Kirk looks like now. They've aged. It's been 10 years, man. Wake up. Okay. So I was better, but it was no competition, shall we say. And I don't think a lot of people in that era were going to say that Star Trek The Next Generation was in any way, Star Trek The Motion Picture was in any way going to dethrone Star Wars and its popularity. So, yeah, no worries there. But then, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan came along, and that turned the tide for me. That was, again, I'm going to go into that in its own video, but that suddenly made me sit up and take notice that Star Trek is actually, it's okay. It's good. Like, not just that one-off motion picture thing. The characters interacting, Kirk, Spock, McCoy dynamic really came through in Star Trek II, and it made me start to appreciate it. And I started watching the original series because it was being rerun on a Sunday afternoon before dinner, so I was just like, or right after dinner. It was perfect timing. Let's watch Star Trek. And I then opened my eyes to the incredible achievement that this series had back in that time. It's a little bit like anybody like Swifto, who's a big Doctor Who fan of like the old Doctor Who, can appreciate, okay, we've got a shoestring budget, so we're going to make aliens out of, egg cartons and packing paper. We're going to, hire some kid with his Casio keyboard to do the music soundtrack. We have to compensate with these limitations by coming up with really good stories. And my God, the original series has some phenomenal episodes. It also has some stinkers, and I'll go into those as well. But it was then that I finally realized, hey, you know what? Star Trek, you're all right. You're no Star Wars. But not long after Star Trek The Wrath of Khan came along, Return of the Jedi ended, and that was it. George Lucas had hung up his blaster and said, well, kids, it's been fun. There will never be any more Star Wars again. So I didn't really jump over to Star Trek, but it was an alternative. It was something else to watch with some depth. Again, by now you had Buck Rogers in the 25th Century and other shows, and I just thought to myself, okay, they're all not really my cup of tea. Star Trek has at least some meat on its bones, no pun intended. Let's watch a lot of Star Trek. And I really delved deep, and I loved Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, Star Trek 4, again, I'll talk about the movies in their own separate thing. Talking 60s Star Trek here. Now, it was around then Next Gen came out, and so I don't really love Next Gen. I hope that's not sacrilegious to say. I have, much like my appreciation of the original series, it grew on me over time, but I didn't like it at first. And I think what was interesting is, Next Generation, when it came along, it made me more loyal to the original series and sort of the Kirk, Spock, McCoy dynamic, because that was, I found, very sorely missing in Next Gen. And this is when I was describing this to my sister once. My rocky relationship with Star Trek was kind of like, okay, it's an acquired taste, and it's very, especially in the 60s, it's very set in its way. I mean, there are some depictions of, I'll go into this in another episode, but like, all the women are wearing miniskirts. Isn't that equal opportunity? There was reasons for that. We'll get into that in another episode. But, you know, Star Trek back then, it appealed to the time that it came out, and I can't really hold it to blame, especially when you consider how many progressive things were in the show compared to the downsides. Something that a lot of people forget nowadays when they think about the original series is that it also had a lot of things going for it that not a lot of shows even carried with further on. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I was explaining to my sister, my feelings of the original series are akin to, like, if you've got an uncle in the family who is old and cantankerous and set in his ways, and people should be this and people shouldn't be that, and darn it, things were better when I was a kid, and these damn whatever groups, you know, we all know somebody who's very set in their ways and old school. I kind of, my opinion of Star Trek, the original series, was kind of like that uncle, where I just thought to myself, God, he's not here, is he? Is he going to start, like, blasting away his opinion of how things were? Because that's not true anymore, and it's embarrassing and cringy. But after Next Gen came out, there was a part of me that kind of sat back and went, okay, you're ticking all the boxes the right way, but I don't really find you have the same heart and soul. And it's almost like discovering that, not to excuse your old uncle, but if you get to know him and if you understand the time that he lived in, if his heart is in the right place, which in the original series case is very, very true, I can kind of forgive his faults and like, okay, you know what? I kind of like you now. I didn't at first, especially in my early Star Wars days. Forget that stupid 60s bongo drum garbage with the miniskirts. But now it's like, yeah, no, there were reasons there were miniskirts. There were reasons a lot of things happened. It's... And when you think about its depiction of, like, Lieutenant Uhura and Sulu, and when Chekhov was introduced, like, all the really crazy, daring things they were doing for the 1960s, you really start to think, oh, you know what? It's easy to look at the flaws, especially by today's yardstick, but for its time, that show was really doing something. And I began to find myself kind of, you know, maybe I'll have a drink with my old uncle and I'll listen to him go on about how things were back in his day, but I'm going to show a little more appreciation for him because he did a lot of things right for his time, but he did a lot of things right. And that is actually where I am now with Star Trek in general. I've watched all of the series, not Discovery. I don't have a problem with it. I just haven't had the time nor the inclination to get into it. Fodder for a future episode. But my favorite of all of the shows, ironically, is the original series, the 1960s show. I didn't ever think that would happen, but it is actually something that has been a complete U-turn or 180 or whatever. Like, I used to hate the original series, and now I love it the most of all of the Star Treks. Where does Star Trek live in my hierarchy of favorite sci-fi shows? I mean, obviously Star Wars is number one. You've heard me talk about Blade Runner. There's another show I haven't touched on yet, which I think is maybe higher than Star Trek. But Star Trek's up there. It's in sort of my top 5 of all my favorites. And I think because I have this very rocky, sometimes I love it, sometimes I hate it, sometimes I love it, sometimes I hate it, mentality, I have started to... It's in a unique place. Star Wars I loved pretty much from day one. Other shows that are in my favorites I've loved from day one. One scared the pants off me. But anyway. But Star Trek, I loved it and I hated it and I loved it and I hated it. So it's in a unique spot. It's kind of in a little capsule on its own over here. It's a show that I really, really learned to love. And now that time has gone by, I really, really like it a lot. As a result, I'm going to be doing some Star Trek on my YouTube channel. Star Wars is not going away. Still got a lot of cool stuff I got to talk about for that. But I just thought, with all the... If it's marked as Star Wars, they'll think it's for kids, and so therefore it might have to be marked as kid-friendly. I just thought to myself, yeah? Well, nobody could say that about Star Trek, so I'm going to start talking about Star Trek now. So, there you go. Alright, well, that's it for now. You're going to see more Star Trek episodes in the future. Anyway, until next time, we'll see you down the rabbit hole and set speed warp factor 5. Execute.